All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, aka Mr. Delks Moses, aka Mr. Anoints himself with grease, governed by caprice. And today is April 3rd, 2025. It's about 10:47 p.m. where I'm at right now, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. We are continuing our reading of Neil MacMaster's epic book, Racism in Europe from 1870 to the year 2000. And this is a powerful book that we started reading about 5 days ago. We've been going live every single day, breaking down this book bit by bit, piece by piece, and the response has been generally great. I'm actually happy. Most of the time I'm doing these live streams just talking to a few people, if not anybody at all, if anybody at all shows up. But I do this work out of passion, out of love. I love education. I love reading books. I love sharing knowledge with people. I love building with people. I love, once again, just anything related to expanding the mind, expanding knowledge. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I love, and that's why I do it regardless. Whether you like me, whether you love me, whether you cherish me, whether you hate me, I'm going to always show up and do what I do on this microphone, on this live stream, on this platform for as long as I have it. So, this is part 5, like I said, and we're going to be jumping into part 2, Blacks Without Blacks, talking about the early invention of racism, of blackness in the post-colonial era, during the time of European empires, during the time of the formation of the nation state as we know it. We're going to be covering all that in Neil MacMaster's great book, which you can find on Amazon for the humble price of only $22.52, $66 paperback, hardcover, sorry. Seems like it's going up. I wonder if I'm helped pushing that up in the algorithm. But this is a book y'all definitely need to have in your libraries. But before we do this reading, like I said before, the reaction to some of the other videos has been generally great. Most of the time I do these book reacts and they get 20 views, 40 views, 50 views. One of them recently got over 300 views, so I'm happy to have that. And I also got quite a lot of comments as well. So what we're going to do at the beginning of every book react, we're going to be reacting to the comments first and foremost before we read the book. That way we can actually engage in the conversation, see who's actually following the pages and everything like that. And once again, I have to stress, this is an educational YouTube channel. If you're not coming here to learn, go somewhere else. So let's jump into the comments. We got one 5 hours ago from a guy named Matthew Stillwagon 4841. Matthew Stillwagon says, "See Europe's latest immigration is going." Now, this is a person whose English is probably a second language to him, so I'm not going to attack him too hard. But this is a person who, if I'm putting together his sentence correctly in my mind, he's saying immigration to Europe is going. He's trying to imply that immigrants are causing problems in Europe, as if it's not the capitalist class, as if it's not the rulers of industry who are continually suppressing wages, not making wages go higher, having people work menial jobs, destroying the social safety net, trying to push for far-right policies to go in place that will take the bearings under people's feet and have them fall through the cracks of society if they're not able to work 40, 50, 60 hours a day until they turn 70 years old, as they continue to push the pension age up. So we're going to just ignore that right there. This is another right-wing numbtard who just came here to spout something because he saw a handsome, chocolate, melanated man talking very sexy, sophisticated, and smart to him. Oh, there's more comments up here. Sorry, I scrolled ahead a bit. Let's go to Superfly right here. I gave this comment a heart. He gave a chat GPT response, which you can read under one of the Book React series videos. He says, "Racism is described as a relatively modern concept evolving during the European age of imperialism, roughly from the late 19th to the early 20th centuries, transformed by capitalism and the Atlantic slave trade, of which it was a major driving force." There's more to the comment right there. I read it. Generally, I agree with it, but I don't like chat GPT responses. Do not come into my classroom. Do not submit your homework. Do not complete the exam with chat GPT. So this comment, even though I gave it a heart, it gets an F in my book. Superfly, do better. Write from your own mind. Going to Manuel Ocasio-Cortez. Okay, he says, Jews brought you guys to white nations, and every single time it was against the will of the regular people in that nation. Now, this is a white supremacist lie that they like to do to absolve themselves of the crime against humanity, which was human trafficking across the Atlantic. But it is not true. First of all, it's not true. Were the majority of the Spaniards Jewish when they decided to import slaves into their empire in the Americas? No. In fact, during the time that the Spanish were colonizing America, they were doing something called the Inquisition. The Inquisition was when they were literally hunting down crypto-Jews, when they were hunting down people who, even though they had converted to Christianity, they still believed those people were Jewish. Now, if you believe that, if you believe that the Jews were the ones importing them, you would have to say that the kings of England, the kings of France, the kings of Spain and Portugal were all secretly crypto-Jewish. And that sounds pretty anti-Semitic. It sounds actually pretty racist, don't you think? So let's continue here. Manuel Ocasio-Cortez says, so what if it is? Europe is for whites, period. Well, Manuel Ocasio-Cortez, before the 19th century, there was no conception of whiteness as far as we're reading in this book. If you have any evidence that Europeans viewed themselves as white, then please let us know. In fact, the comment he's writing is under a video where explicitly, this white Anglo-Saxon professor is telling them that Europeans amongst themselves did not all view themselves as white. They viewed themselves as separate races amongst themselves. The creation of whiteness, as we know it, this transnational identity that basically conforms and comports to any person of European descent by phenotype, is a radically new concept. Because before, literally this guy, Manuel Ocasio-Cortez, this Hispanic person who probably idolizes Adolf Hitler, the Nazis and all the other people who are now the heroes to the white supremacists, did not view the Slavs as white, did not view the Turks as white, did not view the North Africans as white, did not view the Italians, the Spanish as white. So explain that. Europe is for whites, period, since when? Because before, it wasn't just for whites, because there was no conception of whites. Lucky 5757, why go to someone's country they welcomed you to just to stir up trouble? Please come to Nigeria here and make your case, please. Okay, how am I stirring up trouble by reading a book? If you're implying that reading books is troublesome, then I will gladly do more and more trouble. I will be a goddamn terrorist. I will be a terrorist if that means stirring up trouble. Reading books is not trouble. And if it is, it's good trouble. Okay, going here to BetBeat_media. He says, brother, number one, first and foremost, I am nobody's brother. You refer to me as brother, I will call you a motherfucker. You are not my brother. I have one brother. If you are a leftist, if you are an ally, you should be calling me comrade. I am your comrade in global revolution against the capitalist class. I am not your brother. Somebody will call you brother and at the same time blow your brains out. Somebody will call you brother and at the same time blow your brains out. Many a drive-by have been started with, what up, bro? Bap, 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 and fa, fa, fa. Your reading is great. Now, I take this as a backhanded compliment from a white person who assumes that black people cannot read well. And BetBeat Media is a left-wing channel where they interview people that I admire and respect, like Gerald Horne. So I admire that part of what he does. And he has more subscribers than me. Not by much. He has about 3,000 more. But I'll just say this. I don't take that as a compliment. Don't try to sandwich your compliments before you give criticism. Don't do that. I want people to know this. Even though I am a communist, even though I'm an ardent leftist, even though I'm committed to global revolution and revolutionary change and dedicating my life to the struggle, these white leftists will get no pass. These white leftists can be just as bad as the white supremacists we're trying to fight. So we're not, even though I gave this comment a heart, we're not going to let this type of shit slide. So he says 2 tips. Use a good mic. I am using a very good mic that my wife gave me, so y'all can hear me very well. I am using a good mic. It does not have to be close to my mouth because you can hear me well. I don't go into the studios of the famous rappers that I idolize and listen to and bump their albums and tell them, hey man, you should have used a better mic. There's all types of music we listen to. There's all types of content on YouTube we listen to that's recorded well and recorded poorly and recorded just in between. It doesn't matter about the recording. It only matters that people catch the words and react to the text. It's about a fucking book, y'all. Y'all are fucking stupid if you think this is about a microphone. It's literally the text is on screen. You're either supposed to be reading or listening with a good pair of headphones. Maybe you have shitty headphones and I have a good mic. How about that? All right, speak calmly and slowly. No! No! No, nigga! No! I will not speak slowly and calmly. Fuck you. I won't. No. Never! I will never speak calmly and slowly while I'm on this microphone. I'm going to talk the way I want to fucking talk. Fucking stupid ass white leftists. Fucking hate the stupid ass white left that would rather come here and tell a black man how to run his fucking channel than to actually listen and engage and support. Suck my big black dick. Your audience is reading with you, so make us able to think and listen. If you weren't able to think and listen, you would have something to say about the fucking text, you stupid ass cracker. Fucking cracker ass cracker. Fuck you. That's all I got to say about that. Going here to Curtis Donovan. Racism is a waste of time. It's backward thinking, forward ever. That doesn't make any sense, but I generally agree. Racism is a waste of time. All right, Curtis Donovan says, we get it already. What one should now ask themselves, and would they like their children to be charged for their parents' actions? That's missing the point, and Curtis Donovan sounds like a white person because only white people think about, should children be charged for their parents' actions? Because they feel ultimately guilty for what their parents have done. And no, we're not implying that. We're implying that people need to read, study, listen, and take with this information what they will. All right, Yolanda Hughes says the first Europeans and Caucasians were melanated people. I agree with that. So, like I said, every time we start these book reacts, we're going to start with the comments section. Now we're going to actually jump into the book and react to the text as we came to do. If you came here to learn, if you came here to listen, if you came here to be engaged, tune in and let me hear what you have to say in the comment section. So, Blacks Without Blacks, this is part 2, I believe, of part 1. So, in this chapter, we examine how it was possible for Europeans to have a racialized view of the black between circa 1870 and 1914, even though the vast majority had had no direct contact with or even seen a black person. On the whole, our purpose will not be to examine in any detail scientific racist thought or the works of physical anthropologists on the Negro, but rather the question of how and why anti-black stereotypes achieve such a remarkable power and universality in European culture and consciousness, and a key role in the construction of racial hierarchies. By the 19th century, the black represented the paradigm of racial otherness, the marker of that which was most physically, mentally, and culturally different from the civilized European. As the anthropologist Professor W.H. Flower noted in 1880, the African Negro has, on account of his structure being better known than that of any other of the lower races, always been taken as the antithesis of the white man of Europe. Although anti-Semitic stereotypes, as we shall see, were equally entrenched within European culture, the black was the automatic touchstone of all that was biologically or somatically dissimilar. At the lowest level in the hierarchy of racial types, the bottom rung in a descending ladder of primitiveness beyond which one was no longer a human being. So let's make this absolutely clear. Around circa 1870, even though there were hardly any black people in Europe, the vast majority of Europeans, when they mentioned or thought of or read about black people, viewed them as the total antithesis of what humanity was. Let's continue here. Stereotypes and race. Historically, stereotypes have played a fundamental role in the way that racial attitudes have been both structured as well as transmitted among both educated elites and a semi-literate or illiterate public. As social psychologists note, the external world of perception is so immensely complex that the individual, to avoid a kind of sensory overload, is bound to shape and control the chaos of stimuli through imposing simplifying categories or patterns. Okay, Ozzy says, so why can't they just leave her alone? Salute, Simon. Shout out to Ozzy as well. Why can't the white supremacists leave us alone? Because they're obsessed. They're obsessed with the black man's body. They're obsessed with the black man's body for the same reason that we discovered when we read Afro-Pessimism by Frank B. Wilderson. They're obsessed with the black man's body because they have to have some other object to justify their subjectivity. Meaning their humanity is justified by our subjugation. So they have to be obsessed of the other, because if the other ever were to achieve full humanity, they will lose all concept of their own. Continuing here. So, The mental representation of the world that we all deploy are drawn from a vocabulary, a way of seeing that is transmitted to us through socialization by parents and the wider society. Racial stereotypes, like so many other forms of prejudice, gender, class, have an extraordinary capacity to convey perceptions and feelings of the other which bear little, if any, relationship to external reality. However, these highly distorted images, instead of being recognized for what they are understood as real-world entities. So powerfully can stereotypes substitute for reality that the racist can see in both black and Jew, even when they are directly perceived, qualities the very opposite of those that are being observed. So basically what he's saying here is that when we grow up, when we are, taught about the world around us, we're socialized to view certain things that are other than us through a certain lens. And that could be positive or negative. And that can even be distorted when we actually meet the thing that is the opposite of us. So you might meet a nice Jewish guy, or you might meet a very kind and smart and intelligent black man on YouTube, and you might say, no, he's still ignorant. He's still ghetto. He still must be not what I think he is in front of me, because no other black man I know could actually break down complicated philosophical texts with gold chains around his neck and tattoos on his chest. No black man can look like Tupac Shakur reincarnated or some other wannabe rapper or a short NBA player and actually be my philosophical professor. That is not how I'm able to rationalize things in my mind, because that's not how I've been socialized. Continuing here. So, because stereotypes are generally part of a defensive mechanism to protect established beliefs, they tend to serve a highly conservative function and can be transmitted from one generation to the next, or between classes and geographically across society, with an astonishing durability. Stereotypes are central to an understanding of racism in Europe and their formation and dissemination. A rich web of signs and references has been seen by Sander Gilman and others as crucial to the maintenance of prejudice within the wider society. The term black added to any particular context or observation, as in the black criminal escaped, has generally carried a complex set of cognitive and affective associations. The mind's eye would not only summon up images of physical appearance, often grossly distorted, but blackness might also activate negative feelings, a mood, a range of preferences. Our aim here is to explore the ways in which the stereotype of the black came to constitute a universal feature of European culture, one that existed in all social classes and across the continent, from the great cities of the West to the most underdeveloped rural societies of the Mediterranean or Eastern Europe. So basically what he's saying here is that the concept of blackness as the antithesis of humanity was spread all throughout society. Once again, he's just reiterating that point, that the socialization that was happening in Europe when they were talking about humanity and the races and the different peoples of the world that the explorers and the conquistadors were encountering, always made sure that the message went back to Europe that the blacks are the lowest of the low. So continuing here. It needs to be made clear that contemporary writers often use the term black as the most vague of categories that could include all darker-skinned peoples from Africa to India and New Zealand. During the Indian Rebellion of 1857, officers wishing to express contempt and loathing consistently referred to Indians as N-words. However, this expression was most commonly deployed by both race theorists as well as within popular discourse as a term for sub-Saharan Africans, referred to in English as the Negro, in French, le nègre, in German, the Neger. Okay, I'd hate to hear a German person call me a Neger, but that's horrible. But once again, we need to remember, there are other groups of people all across the world that say Indians are just like black people, so we can say the N-word too. We Albanians are just like black people, so we can say the N-word too. We insert ethnic group or racial minority, whatever, religious group into this blank, and they could say, we've been oppressed, we've been enslaved, we've been all sorts of things, so we're just like black people too, so we can say the N-word because people have deployed it against us. But we have to remember that the N-word was meant to refer to black people. It's not a word that has a meaning of its own that makes it insulting. It's insulting because it is black. It's insulting because it refers to the sub-Saharan African. So the Albanian that's saying we deserve to be N-words too, we deserve to be called the N-word, or we are N-words and we're going to say it regardless of whether you like it or not. No, they are not understanding that they are taking a word that was offensive about black people and applied to them as well because other people viewed them as less than human because they're closer to blackness in their minds. Or not even that. Similar to how, let's say, for example, let's take the F word, F-A-G-G-O-T. F-A-G-G-O-T. F-A-G-G-O-T, you can spell it out for yourself. If somebody calls a straight man an F-A-G-G-O-T, we know that is insulting, not because that man is actually gay. It's because it's a term referred to a group of people who have been historically marginalized, and it's a slur explicitly for them. So for any of those people that want to use the N-I-G-G-E-R, first call yourself F-A-G-G-O-Ts first. First call yourself F-A-G-G-O-Ts first. Because calling yourself N-I-G-G-E-Rs is just reinforcing the negative stereotype about black people being N-I-G-G-E-Rs. Call yourself an F-A-G-G-O-T first. So let's continue here. This categorization did not bear much relationship to the enormous physical and ethnic diversity of African peoples. Rather, it was a kind of composite being, a caricature that was constructed by reference to exaggerated features, like a crude identikit image that constantly used the same simple components. The definition used by the famous Swiss anatomist Georges Cuvier in 1817 is quite typical of the standard formulation. The Negro race is confined to the south of Mount Atlas. It is marked by a black complexion, crisped of woolly hair, compressed cranium, and a flat nose. The projection of the lower part of the face and the thick lips evidently approximated to the monkey tribe. The hordes of which it consists have always remained in the most complete state of utter barbarism. For people that don't know, the Atlas Mountains run through generally North Africa, from Morocco, Algeria to Tunisia. So, continuing here. European expansion overseas, slavery, and anti-black racism. In order to understand the centrality of the black racial stereotype within European society, something needs to be said, no matter how briefly, about the long history of white contact with Africans, the exploration of the continent between the 15th and 19th centuries, the development of slave societies in the plantation economies of the Americas, the abolitionist movement, and the eventual partition of Africa in the scramble from 1875 to 1912. See, this is why this book, even though it's very dope, it's going to require much more research. Like, this is just a primer, because what we now call white people racialized as white and people racialized as black, have been having contact with each other for millennia, since the beginning of time, since we've inhabited this planet, right? But this book of only 200 pages can't cover all of that vast, expansive history. So more research needs to be done, and no one book is going to contain all the information that we need to really come to the bottom of these issues and reach some higher conclusion. Let's continue here. So, European contact with blacks increased dramatically from the 15th century onwards as the west coast of Africa was charted and settled. It is clear that highly negative stereotypes began to develop even before the slave trade and were closely linked to a Christian worldview that saw the African as the embodiment of all that was most heathen. They were typically described as a people of beastly living, without a god, law, religion, or commonwealth. Europeans were both fascinated and repelled by the African skin color, a revulsion that was deeply ingrained in the negative symbolic connotations of blackness, the symbolism of fearful night, of death, hell, the devil, witchcraft, and all that was most evil and sinister. Africans were associated with all that was most savage and beastly. And then animality was already in the 16th century, described in terms of the sexual potency of blacks, their lewd nakedness, and the supposed size of the male penis. From the 17th century onwards, the physiological distinction between apes and blacks was seen as indeterminate, and their closeness was seen in sexual terms as one of beastly copulation. The contact with Africa accelerated just as the Reformation and Counter-Reformation was leading to a generalized phase of sexual repression within European society and a puritanical preoccupation with sin. The process of stereotyping was in part a projection onto the black of all that was thought to be most opposed to the central values of the Christian order. Significantly, anti-black prejudice was constructed through the inversion of every taboo that was held to define a civilized society. taboos against eating human flesh, of sexual intercourse with animals, of incest, of sacrilege, and paganism. Now, this is very interesting. He's implying that, the early Europeans who had contact with Africans who traveled there, right, basically left with a negative impression because of the religious world that they came from. We have to remember that Europe was like the Middle East back in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. Basically, it was run by religious fanatics who believed everything that the Pope put down, that the priest put down. And so, yeah, the priests, the popes, for hundreds of years told people that hell is populated with black demons, the Satan is black, and all that sort of stuff. And maybe they thought of it as black as a color, right? Because black people generally, there are some black people with very dark melanin, but there are very few like pure jet black people, right? And I'm pretty sure that the Africans that the Europeans met came in all different shades and complexions because we, as melanated black African people, come in all different sizes, shapes, colors, and that sort of stuff, right? That's the beauty of being us. So, yeah, they just met a few different types and were just so revulsed because of the worldview that they had been socialized in of hearing all their lives, for centuries even, that God was white and the devil was black. Continuing here. So, however, it was within the slave societies of the Americas that anti-black stereotypes achieved their most systematic formulation. As Robin Blackburn notes, the 18th century saw the elaboration of a systematic slavery that saw levels of degradation and violence unknown in the older forms of diffuse ancillary slavery practiced by Spain and Portugal. The slave population of the Americas increased from 400,000 in 1700 to 2.4 million in 1770. The plantation economies not only engaged in barbaric practices like whipping, branding, and the sale of blacks as chattel, but also institutionalized the slave system through regulations and law. White planter societies felt extremely vulnerable, frequently outnumbered 10 to 1 by the slave population, paranoid at the potential for undetected revolt, and aware that domination depended on a precarious line of psychological control or terror. Slaves erected elaborate codes of repression. For example, the boundaries between black and white society were policed by strict laws that banned interracial marriages or which blocked the social ascent and economic challenge of mixed-race freemen by defining those with a single drop of African blood as black. By the 18th century, the association between slavery and the Afro-Caribbean was so deeply entrenched in European culture that the color black was taken as an automatic signifier of slavery. Going now to Jermaine, he says, good teaching, my FBA brother. Once again, guys, I don't know how many times I got to say it. I'll probably be saying this for the rest of my live stream. It's Comrade Hill. It's Comrade Hill. It's Comrade Hill. Please call me Comrade. I have one brother. I have one brother. Somebody will call you brother and blow your brains out. If you've ever been in the streets, the first thing they say, what up, bro? Pop, 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 fa, fa, fa. We don't call each other brother. We are comrades. Comrades are people who are ideologically aligned. Brothers are people that can murder each other. Brothers are people that are put together by just sheer luck and circumstance. Comrades are people who are joined together lockstep in arms on the fight towards freedom, justice, and equality, and self-enlightenment. Comrades are ideological. I'm going to make this clear. Comrades are ideologically aligned. Because some of y'all, comrades are ideologically aligned. Brothers murder each other. We don't do that brother talk here, but everybody is welcome. But call me Comrade Hill, Comrade Simon, or Delks Moses, either one. Continuing here. However, the crucial period for systematic racialization of blacks, the elaboration of ideologies of racial inferiority, came with the century-long movement for the abolition of slavery, but circa 1750 and 1850. The main drive towards the abolition of slavery in North America and Europe came from Quaker, nonconformist, and humanitarian movements from the 1740s onwards, which emphasized the Christian ideal of the fundamental unity of mankind and the equality of each soul before God. As the Reverend Andrew Eliot stated in 1774, the meanest slave hath a soul as good by nature as yours, and possibly by grace it is better. Enlightenment thinkers located within a more secular tradition arrived at a similar notion of equality on the grounds that people of all races shared the same universal human nature and had a similar potential for rationality and progress. Enlightenment philosophers, in theorizing aesthetics and perception, were perfectly aware of the nature of the Eurocentric values that painted the black as ugly and disgusting. Thus, as Herder emphasized, 1797, there was no hierarchy of color in nature. The naturalist does not postulate an order of merit among the creatures which he observes. All are of equal value and concern. The black has as much right to consider the white a mutant, a born vermin, as the white has to consider him a beast, a black animal. That's hard. That's absolutely hard. Shout out to this guy Herder. What was this guy's name again? Herder what? This guy he was spitting. He was spitting right there. Basically, he's saying black people have as much right to view white people as demons, devils, etc., for what they have put black people through, right? All people are equal. Their skin color doesn't matter. What was this guy's name? Reverend Andrew Eliot, Enlightenment philosophers. Okay, that's Herder. That's as Herder emphasized. Okay, maybe Herder was mentioned earlier. Anyway, going on to Immanuel Kant. Kant remarked in 1790 that the normative idea of the beautiful varied from one society and racial group to another. This relativist and sociological approach to difference was anathema to conservative, anti-revolutionary, and pro-slavery ideologues. The planter Edward Long, for example, met this challenge by emphasizing the radical biological difference of blacks. Long, in his History of Jamaica, 1774, put forward a defense of slavery in secular terms that reflected the new science of race. I think there are extremely potent reasons for believing that the white and the Negro are two distinct species. Very interesting. So, the transition towards modern forms of anti-black racism from circa 1870 onwards was marked by a reversal of the century-long trend towards a humanitarian and liberal movement for slave emancipation. The abolitionist campaign had been a long drawn-out affair. A large-scale popular movement in Britain had achieved abolition in a widening movement. 1788, 1799, 1806, 1814, 67. While in France, surges in 1794, 1815, 1831, and 1861 were separated by phases of restoration. This long battle appeared to have been won definitely in Europe by the 1860s and the Confederate defeat in the American Civil War. 1861 to 1865, marked the beginning of what seemed to be a new era of universal human rights, an inevitable stage in the progress towards a future society of enlightenment and humanity. The abolitionist movement that had triumphed everywhere in Europe had succeeded in spreading a more positive image of the black. If he or she appeared to be in a savage state, backward, immoral, and violent, this arose from environmental conditions, including the dehumanizing impact of slavery itself, rather than from any innate inferiority. Given the rights conditions of emancipation, education, and development, the blacks would eventually catch up and join the civilized white European. It came as a considerable surprise to liberal humanists after circa 1870 to note a deep shift within European society towards a new form of intolerant and anti-black racism, a kind of lurch back to a previous age of feudal despotism and cruelty that was in defiance of the march of progress. So, once again, this is why we have no allies. This is why we have no allies as black people, because white people's sort of whims change with the wind. In one instance, after, the abolition of slavery, emancipation for all, after certain waves of enlightenment, white people eventually regress. We saw this, they elect Obama, and then after that they pick Trump. You get what I'm saying? We can't just be, riding with the white liberals all the time. This is why, even though I'm a communist, even though I'm dedicated to abolishing capitalism, we cannot only have a class analysis, because the class analysis doesn't explain them hanging us from trees and cutting our dicks off. The class analysis of Marxists does not explain why they incessantly raped black women. The class analysis from the Marxists doesn't explain why they bent over black men and fucked them in front of all the other slaves as buck breaking, as a way to make black men behave as slaves. None of that makes sense in the class analysis alone. We are in an ideological war with white supremacy, and white supremacy moves back and forth. Moves back and forth between giving more rights to the Negro and then other times regressing and entrenching itself. We are fighting a war against capitalism and also against white supremacy. And those two things are not intertwined. White supremacy is an overarching Hegelian idea that marches forward in time that seems to be almost unstoppable unless we actually do something by abolishing whiteness. Capitalism, on the other hand, begets white supremacy, but now the monster is out of Pandora's box. There could be an end to capitalism, but not an end to white supremacy. White supremacy in and of itself will not be abolished just through capitalism being gone. So let's continue here. The growth of anti-black racism from circa 1870. This watershed had been best documented for anti-black racism in the case of Britain, but it is likely that a similar shift towards a more intolerant and aggressive form of racism took place within other European colonial nations during the last third of the 19th century. In Germany, for example, the leading anti-Semite, Wilhelm Marr, like so many of his contemporaries, was radical in politics up until the 1848 revolution, and then moved distinctly towards an anti-liberal, authoritarian, and racist position. Between 1852 and 1859, Marr traveled as a merchant in Central America, particularly in Costa Rica, and was accused by the Berlin Central Society for Colonization of being a slave trader. In an article of 1862 towards an understanding of the events in North America, which was seen as a defense of the Confederate South and of slavery, he stated, "The Negroes are closer to beasts than to human beings." It is interesting to note that Marr's initial shift towards a racist position appears to have been generated within a colonial context, and that his anti-black racism predated and provided the basis for his subsequent development of a racial anti-Semitism. This, as will be seen later, may have been a general feature of European anti-Semitism and can explain in part why Jews were or Negroes through cross-reference or analogy to the black stereotype. In Britain, the sea change towards intolerance, going out to the comments, Ozzy says it always goes back to anti-blackness and proximity to whiteness. Facts. I have nothing else to add to that. That sums it up right there. Ozzy said everything that I said in that little rant I did in one sentence. Perfect. So, in Britain, the sea change towards intolerance can be noted as early as Carlyle's virulent tract, Discourse on the N-word Question. I really wish YouTube would let me say the N-word. It's so crazy that I can be this black and I have no privileges on YouTube. Where's my black privilege? I want to be able to say the N-word because this is a wild title for a book. Discourses on the N-word Question. Anyway. In Britain, the sea change towards intolerance can be noted as early as Carlyle's virulent tract, Discourse on the N-word Question, 1849. But the key phrase came in 1862 and 1867. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, widely reported in the British press, gave rise to deep anxieties about an imminent slave war in which blacks, reverting to their primitive instincts, would engage in bloody violence and rape. In 1863, James Hunt presented a famous paper on the Negro's place in nature to the Anthropological Society of London. In this, he developed the thesis that blacks constituted a separate species from the European, and that there is a far greater difference between the Negro and the European than between the gorilla and chimpanzee. Hunt's diatribe was a compilation called from the most vicious anti-black writers, but significantly much of it was drawn from scientific, pro-slavery racists in the United States. Misguided abolitionists, Hunt claimed, through their rose-pink sentimentalism and belief in the mental equality of the different races, had inflicted untold misery on the blacks since they ignored the anthropological science which understood their true characteristics, the inherent needs and wants of Africans. Race science development and happiness in the Confederate States and the pre-emancipation West Indies, where the Negro is working in his natural subordination to the European. Hunt marked a reactionary and post-emancipation link between the unworkable nature of black freedom and the eternal backwardness of black Africa, by contrasting the paradise of American slave society with the horrors of Africa, its juju worship, cannibalism, sexual depravity, and barbarism. Kamal jumped into the chat. He dropped a diamond. Shout out to Kamal. Diamonds in the house. Yeah, I have to say this, though. I don't know where Mr. MacMaster is going in this chapter, talking about this, very racist British man around this time that the Civil War is happening. But the book that I read, Black and British by David Olusoga, which all of you should pick up. I didn't read it on Livestream. But the way he talked about how the British reacted to the American Civil War is a bit more nuanced. Basically, the Brits always like to act like they're better than Americans. So when America was doing slavery and then Britain abolished the slave trade and slavery way before the Americans did, they used that to say, we're so much more enlightened than those backwards, stupid Americans, right? And when the Americans were fighting the Civil War, many of the British were siding with the North because of books like Uncle Tom's Cabin, which were very popular throughout the UK, and Frederick Douglass and other black people who had escaped slavery going on speaking tours throughout the UK. So it's more nuanced. The British public was a bit split. There were a lot of people that supported the North, fighting to keep the Union together and hopefully to end slavery, and other people who supported the South for various reasons, whether they be economic or not. So it's not just so black and white. And this is why it's good to read. This is why it's good to actually pick up a book. This is why the stupid people in my YouTube comment section can never actually have a debate with me if I opened up the phone lines or if I actually chatted to them. Because a lot of them just look at 4chan memes and look at whatever stupid thing they saw on Twitter or X as they call it now, and then just believe that, not knowing that they're regurgitating the same BS talking points that came from white supremacists literally 200 years ago. Literally 200 years ago. They're reiterating the same stuff. So it's really dumb. But this is why it's good to have a nuanced view of things by reading different sides. This is a white man writing about racism in Europe. And then we have David Olusoga, a black man, writing about the history of black folks in Europe and racism as well. So that way we get a balanced view. All right, let's continue here. Hunt was a minority voice in 1863, but his type of racism was given added impetus by the Jamaican rebellion in Morant Bay in October 1865, which was crushed by the orders of Governor Ayer with savage brutality and the execution of 439 men. By the way, the Morant Bay Rebellion is a very, very interesting of black resistance to because at the time, 1865, Jamaica was no longer a slave colony, but there were still many, many poor black people there who had no access to the land because Britain gave reparations to the slave owners, not to the slaves. So a lot of the slave owners were able to keep their large farms and basically employ the people that they used to have as slaves for pennies on the dollar. And they forbid black Jamaicans from owning land in Jamaica after the abolition of slavery. So lots of Jamaica was owned by the white folks who had formerly enslaved the people. So the people in Morant Bay in Jamaica rose up and tried to take back the land, and they were murdered. They were murdered. That was a crime against humanity that the British did. So that's why we're not surprised that we see Britain supporting Israel today. That's why we're not surprised we see America, France, Germany, other countries supporting Israel today. We shouldn't be surprised because genocide has been the name of their game. We are the survivors of a genocide. If you are black and from the Americas, you are the survivor of a genocide. And I'm not saying America, I mean the Americas. We are the survivors of genocide. We are the survivors of genocide, and the perpetrators of genocide still walk among us today. I'm in Budapest right now where Netanyahu is having a palinka dinner with our guy, Orban Viktor. So yeah, it's the world. We're still in a long-ass fight against white supremacy and capitalism. So continuing here. So Hunt was a minority voice in 1863, but his type of racism was given added impetus by the Jamaican rebellion at Morant Bay in October 1865, which was crushed by the orders of Governor Ayer with savage brutality and the execution of 439 men. As during the American Civil War, the British press indulged in sensational accounts of black atrocities, horrible mutilations, the drinking of rum and gunpowder from victims' skulls, and the classic phobia, the rape of white women. God forbid somebody rape white women. Oh, God forbid. No, please don't rape anybody. But I'm so sick of this. I'm so sick of them always using that. I'm so sick of them always using the perfect victim as a way to victimize the perpetual victim, which are black men. Morant's Bay revived memories of the Indian Rebellion, 1857, the most profound and bloodiest of challenges to British colonial power, as well as of the ongoing Maori Wars. However, the deep anxiety of the metropolitan public, a kind of moral panic in relation to the Black Peril, had less to do with any direct threat offered to them by a distant colony than with tensions in British society, and the race threat offered by the working class. The age of Victorian economic stability was on the wane, while the middle class was profoundly unsettled by the agitation for a universal franchise. Popular radicalism from the era of the French Revolution onwards had made a direct link between the figure of the chained black slave, depicted on countless plates, posters, and prints, kneeling in supplication, "Am I not a man and a brother?" and the condition of the British laborer, the industrial slave in mill and mine. The violent suppression of a workers' demonstration in Hyde Park in 1866 was compared by them to the crushing of blacks, and they proceeded to burn an effigy of Governor Eyre. In a mirror image of this language of freedom, which saw black and white engaged in a common battle to break the chains of tyranny, the conservative middle class viewed the threat from below as quite literally a race war, a challenge by the dangerous classes who were described as savages and Negroes. Moves to prosecute the governor of Jamaica were countered by a campaign of the middle class that, as John Stuart Mill noted, was living in a constant dread of the encroachment of the class beneath, which makes it one of their strongest feelings that resistance to authority by blacks must be put down. Going to the Kamal in the comments, he says, "I barely knew Facebook had a news feed where the majority of those types get their so-called knowledge." That's the big problem. A lot of people just get their knowledge from what other people are saying, from reporting from, Indian news farms, which basically regurgitate all sorts of talking points and propaganda that people want to hear. A lot of people just want confirmation bias. A lot of people just want to read and see what already affirms their worldview. But that's not what we do on this channel. I read Donald Trump's book. I read the most vile and wicked man living right now. I read his book on Livestream because I wanted to be challenged. We read the works of the white supremacists, like we read Field Manual 66 or whatever it's called, which is basically a play-by-play plan that the white supremacists made to carry out genocide on American soil against black people if the race war ever popped out. As if we're not living in a race war right now, where the police are shooting black men in the back and getting off scot-free, where we have people like Hero calling for George Floyd's killer to be pardoned and set free. We're living in a race war right now. But not on this channel. On this channel, we don't just read things that confirm what we already know. We read entire texts, we read entire books, and we read the works of the white supremacists themselves to hear it out of their own damn mouths. This ain't your Facebook news feed. This ain't a Twitter stream. This is an actual intellectual, a black man in front of you. Read him, goddammit. So tune in. And I'm not talking to you, Kamal, but I'm talking to everybody else out there who's quiet, and the people out there who are racist as hell, as you saw in my comment section at the beginning of this video. Continuing here. So we're talking about how basically in Jamaica, the black people rose up to try to take back their land, take back their country, make Jamaica great again, or make Jamaica great for the first time. The white people crushed that rebellion, and the middle class whites that were still living in Jamaica as kings and queens were paranoid that the blacks were going to come in the night and do all sorts of horrible things to them. So the elaboration of a modern and aggressive racism from the 1860s was thus one expression of a profoundly insecure bourgeoisie society that constantly played upon and interwove the rhetoric of race and class. The modern race science that began to naturalize difference and emphasize the radical biological gap between black and white lent itself well to the language of class. The challenge that was offered by the lower orders to bourgeoisie hegemony, the call for universal rights and equality, was blocked by an ideology which emphasized the inherited biological inferiority and low intelligence of the working class/race. As Thomas Holt has argued, the trend towards a virulent form of racism was founded on the very premise of liberal ideology. Liberals, they always seem to do the worst. No matter what era, the liberals always seem to be doing the worst. Whether that be Cory Booker standing up for 24 hours on end, pissing on himself in a diaper, or whether it's back in the 1870s when the liberals were saying that there are good forms of racism, the liberals always seem to be doing the worst. So the freedom that was granted with the abolition of slavery in 1833 was grounded on the premise that plantation economies were less efficient when based on forced labor. Once slaves were free, it was expected that they would naturally follow the rational order of the market economy and become more productive. However, the ex-slave in Jamaica preferred to find a different kind of freedom by moving away from the plantations and setting up small peasant proprietors who controlled their own land and labor. By the 1850s, 1950s, this shift was being interpreted as the failure of emancipation, the ex-slaves' movement into what was viewed as a primitive life in the hill country, a decline into idleness, feckless poverty, and moral degeneration, represented an inevitable reversion back to the inherited qualities of the savage. As the Jamaican magistrate A. Trelawney commented, their march back to barbarism has been rapid and successful. All right. Kamal says, I know, comrade. Keep enforcing. Shout out to Kamal. Shout out to everybody else who's up in the live stream. Let's keep on reading, man. So, by the late 1860s, the predominant thinking among colonial officials and policymakers in London was that black populations in the Caribbean, Africa, and elsewhere, unlike the colonies of white settlement like Canada and Australia, which could be prepared for self-government, would have to remain under the benevolent guardianship of their white masters. Here was the root of the pernicious racist ideology still current today in relation to African nations, which maintained that blacks were incapable of invention, of elaborating democratic political or legal systems, of hygiene, and all the other features of civilization. I just have to say this. I understand that Neil MacMaster is writing down the negative stereotypes and the negative perceptions of black people. I just feel like at this point in time, as we're writing moving forward, because this book was written over 20 years ago, right? It came out in 2001. I just feel like we don't have to continue to repeat the negative stereotypes about us. At least we don't have to. If we're black writers or black thinkers, we don't have to say when people think of black folks, they think of X, Y, and Z. We can just say X, Y, and Z. Or we can just say that people think of negative things. But we don't have to continue to repeat them. Now, this is not trying to run from the harsh realities of what people think about us. But it's like we don't have to keep on repeating the lie to say that it's a lie. Do you get what I'm saying? Like if somebody said that your friend cheated on his wife or stole some money, you don't have to tell people, hey, it's not true that my friend cheated on his wife and stole some money. You would just say, it's not true what they're saying about my friend. He's a good guy. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, so continuing here. So such progress for African nations could be achieved only under white tutelage, but once the hand of the European master was withdrawn, black populations descended rapidly into chaos, barbarism, and animality. On a visit to Jamaica in 1885, J.A. Froude expressed anxiety at the prospect of an independent black society that would degenerate into a savage jungle existence. Nature has made us unequal, and acts of parliament cannot make us equal. Some must lead and some must follow. During the same period, British missionaries in West Africa began to report that many years of work to convert the Africans to win them from cannibalism, thieving, lying, sexual perversion, and paganism had got nowhere against the hereditary fetishism of their race. I just have to say this real quick. It's so funny, so ironic that the Europeans always talked about cannibalism when multiple times throughout their history they documented themselves. They ate each other. They ate each other. Didn't my wife and I just review Society of the Snow, where a bunch of dumbass, very white, Latin American Uruguayans got trapped in the hills 5 miles away from Santiago, and then they started eating each other because they couldn't figure out where east was and where west was. And also, let's just go back in deeper parts of European history, man. Deeper parts of European history into antiquity. Cannibalism was practiced all throughout Europe. All throughout Europe. Continuing here. The partition of Africa and racism. Was the transition after the 1860s to a more virulent form of anti-black racism peculiar to Britain, or was it a phenomenon shared by continental Europe? Part of the answer to this question can be found in the way that several nations, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Portugal, had a major stake in the drive towards the partition and rapid economic exploitation of Africa between 1875 and 1912. During the age of the new imperialism, anti-black racist stereotypes were powerfully reinforced through a mass of official and informal propaganda, from school textbooks and a cheap popular press, to the work of missionaries and colonial exhibitors. Before examining this area in more detail, some note must be taken of the development of racism in the colonies and its impact on metropolitan societies. It was in the overseas empires that Europeans, either as permanent settlers or as more temporary administrators, judges, missionaries, soldiers, traders, and engineers, had the most sustained contact with Africans, while within Europe before 1914, anti-black racism, in the almost total absence of Africans, developed mainly in a theoretical form. The colonies, as with the earlier slave plantations of the 17th and 18th centuries, provided the terrain in which racism grew in its most powerful and virulent forms, as a racial praxis grounded in military conquest, systematic violence, land dispossession, forced labor, and segregation. Between 1875 and 1912, the 7 rival nations, Germany, Italy, Portugal, France, Britain, Belgium, and Spain, partitioned a whole continent, created 30 new colonies and protectorates covering 10 million square miles of territory, and acquired 110 million new subjects. The process of colonization varied historically from one territory to another, but there were certain shared characteristics that can be illustrated by the German occupation of the Cameroons and Namibia, 1884 to 1914. In the Cameroons, the Germans had no hesitation in taking over enormous areas of the most fertile land, which was divided up into plantation concessions owned by various companies, like the African Fruit Company and the German West African Company, controlled by financiers, bankers, and speculators in Hamburg, Berlin, and Bremen. Going now to Kamal, I think that cannibalism sickened them even more. I've heard, in fact, I'm not going to repeat that, because I don't think it's true. But I'm just going to say, when I was younger, I used to think, because I heard this maybe somewhere, like on the History Channel, or I read it somewhere, that cannibalism causes people to develop like worms in their brain or something like that. So if that could happen over generations of time, I'm not going to become a eugenicist here. I'm not going to put that type of stuff out there. But I'm just saying, if there was a group of people who were living in a place where agriculture was scarce, where the temperatures were very cold, where the fight for survival was a daily occurrence, where you didn't have the abundance of sunshine and natural resources all around you, and big booty, big titty women just flopping all around, and everything you had to fight for your life, I could also imagine them resorting to cannibalism and getting those worms in their brain. Ozzy says, Namibia and South Africa still got cities full of Germans and Afrikaners. That's the truth. That's the truth. And we want freedom from the river to the sea. Kill the Boer. Kill the Boer. Kill the Boer. And send Elon back to Africa. I'm sorry, y'all got me off on a tangent here. All right, the plantations could only be made profitable through an enormous labor input. But since the indigenous people were resistant to the harsh and intensive forms of work imposed by overseers, the plantation companies resorted to a system of forced labor and brutality. So atrocious were the working conditions that 16% of men died on the Prince Alfred plantation during 1913. Wealthy bankers like Adolf von Hansemann and S. Blackendorf invested in the German Southwest Africa Company that took over a huge Namibian concession in 1885, an area of 240,000 square kilometers. The seizure of hereditary cattle lands, the building of railway lines, and the development of mining eventually led to the Namaharero uprisings of 1904 and 1907. This drawn-out guerrilla war was put down with the utmost savagery and a systematic repression that can be rightly described as genocidal. Pardon. So the picture was much the same throughout Africa. Sorry. A disregard for native land rights, the brutal use of superior technical and military power to impose the settlers' will, the dislocation of indigenous societies, and a low evaluation of African life. The unspeakable atrocities. Ooh. Okay. All right. So, my body's telling me I gotta stop. My body's telling me I gotta stop. I've been going hard for about an hour or so, I'm gonna stop right here. We're going to pick up on this section. I'll probably reread this section as we talk about the partition of Africa and how that further cemented anti-blackness amongst Europeans. So I got to stop right here. I need some water. Plus, I got class in 15 minutes, so I got to head back to work. But it was a pleasure being here with all of y'all. Sorry about that. I know a lot of y'all are tuned in. But yeah, I gotta get to going. I've been going hard in here. Plus, it's been a long ass day. I've been up since 6 a.m. Up since 6 a.m. Going to university, teaching English classes, doing writing for culturalist theory, and coming on live stream to do these book reads with y'all. I'm a hard-working black man. I'm a hard-working black man, and I hope I inspire all of you to work hard too and do everything you can to make yourself better and make the world better. So let me give a comment. Let me give a shout out, everybody. Kamal, Ozzy, Jermaine, and everybody else who tuned in who didn't say anything. Y'all be easy out there. We'll pick up on this section next time we read Neil MacMaster's book, Racism in Europe. Peace.